Yeah,
It's just
and you
not,
do a lot, too.
yeah, too much.
Good evening, and welcome to the New Ulm League of Women Voters Candidates Forum, featuring the candidates for Minnesota House District 15B. My name is Kathleen Berg. I am a member of the New Ulm League of Women Voters and am the moderator for the District 15B Candidates Forum. This forum is designed to educate voters in preparation for the general election. The general election will be held on November 5th, 2024. The League of Women Voters is a local, state, and national nonpartisan volunteer group. We encourage informed and active participation of citizens in government, and we influence public policy through education and advocacy. Our event tonight is designed to educate the voters about the relevant views of these candidates. Our candidates tonight will answer questions presented from the audience, members, and the League of Women Voters pursuant to a nonpartisan, unbiased, and impartial format established by the League of Women Voters of Minnesota. Our purpose is to facilitate an opportunity to hear the candidates discuss the issues of importance to the public in this election. We are grateful for our media partners. The New Ulm Journal is covering the event. In addition, we are broadcasting live tonight on New Ulm Community Access Television. The event will be available on demand on the City of New Ulm YouTube channel, accessible at the City of New Ulm website. And also will be NewCat, it will be rebroadcast, this particular event, periodically before the election. KNUJ is also broadcasting live tonight. We have several questions that were submitted by members of the public via email to LWVNEWULM, I'm sorry, I'll say that over again, LWVNEWULM at lwvmn.org. We will continue to accept questions during the forum from audience members here at the New Ulm City Hall and by email, and also by phone. Phone number to call is 507-276-2099. Ushers will have note cards available for the audience members. Please write your question on a note card and pass it to one of the ushers. I will repeat the email and phone numbers in a bit. Those also are posted on the screen for those of you viewing us on television and YouTube. We have given each candidate 2 questions in advance, which were drafted by the League of Women Voters New Ulm. The candidates have not been given any other questions in advance. We will present questions received from the public, including audience members and questions which have been prepared in advance by the League of Women Voters New Ulm. We do screen all questions. We may rephrase, combine, or eliminate questions to avoid duplication. Questions will not be asked if they are of a personal nature and not relevant to the office, or if they are designed only to make a statement rather than solicit information. Our intention is screening questions is to select questions that represent the interests of the person that submitted the question. We usually receive more questions than we have time to submit. If you have submitted a question that is not asked, or if you want more information about a topic that is covered tonight, please contact the candidate directly after the forum. Let's begin the Minnesota House District 15B Candidate Forum. The procedure we will follow begins with asking each candidate to introduce themselves with a short statement. They will each have 2 minutes. Upon completion of the introductions, each candidate will be given 2 minutes to respond to questions which I will read. The order of responses will be alternated. Candidates will also have 2 minutes for closing remarks at the end of the forum. We ask that the audience hold their applause and refrain from reacting to the candidates during the forum. We find that we can make the most of this opportunity if we move along with the questions without the need to wait for applause or reaction. As we know, you are here because you are interested in becoming informed about these candidates' positions on as many issues as possible. Please respect our process by listening respectfully to both of the candidates tonight. As I said, candidates' responses are timed. An official timekeeper will mark the time and will signal the candidates as their time expires. We look forward to a respectful learning experience. The candidates are expected to honor time limits. Now, let us begin with the opening statements from Tom Custer and Paul Torkelson. Paul Torkelson will give his opening statement first.
Thank you, Kathleen, and thanks to the League of Women Voters for putting this forum together. It's greatly appreciated. And thanks all of you who are listening or attending for your interest in Minnesota politics. My name is Paul Torkelson. I am the endorsed Republican candidate for District 15B, and I want to thank the voters for the strong support I've received in elections over the last 16 years. I'm finishing my 8th term in the Minnesota House of Representatives, and I hope to be reelected to a 9th term this fall. The general election is November 5th, and whether it's through your mailbox or at the ballot box, I hope all of you take the time to vote. It has truly been an honor to serve my constituents and represent them at the Capitol. I am actively involved in the operation of my farm as a fourth-generation farmer. I am directly connected to the everyday issues affecting Minnesota. I am proud of my record in the legislature over these last 16 years, representing my district and dealing with some of the most challenging issues of the day. The broad range of my experience in and out of the legislature has equipped me with the skills and perspective that help me successfully represent my constituents. I've developed a good working relationship with the residents of the district and likewise with a broad range of legislators, staff members, state agency personnel, and interest groups that are all part of the work of the legislature. Representing the district at the Capitol involves activities that range far beyond what happens in committees or on the House floor. Much of what I do is centered around the challenges my constituents face when dealing with Minnesota government agencies. A candidate needs to stand up for important issues, and I do. I support a pro-life agenda. I support agriculture and our rural way of life. I support our Second Amendment rights. I support fair funding for our rural schools, and I support making Minnesota a business-friendly state. I am truly blessed to have the opportunity to serve the fine people of South Central Minnesota, and I look forward to responding to your questions tonight. Feel free to contact me at any time.
Thank you. Tom Custer, your opening statement.
Thank you, League. I'm Tom Custer, a retired college teacher, offering my skills and experience to serve you by talking with you and together finding ways that your government can partner with you to make your life better. I've taught and practiced advocacy. I've taught and practiced problem solving. I've taught and practiced conflict resolution, valued skills for representing you and getting things done. I'm running against my friend Paul here because I'm afraid you haven't had that effective representation for many years. His promotional material that comes to my mailbox highlights that he is a person you can trust. I have no doubt I can trust him in many situations. He's an honest and upright man. I'd trust him to repay a loan. I'd trust him if he needed to borrow my car. But the questions we're considering here in this every 2 years performance review that we call an election are twofold. First, can we trust him to look out for your interests and get things done for you in the legislature? A search through the record raises serious doubts about that. And second, and probably more important, if I'm crossing the street and I don't notice a huge semi bearing down on me, could I trust Representative Torkelson to warn me? Well, there is a huge semi bearing down on us. It's not one of the pretty colored ones based in New Ulm. The sign on the side is Project 2025, bearing down on all of us. And it seems we can't trust Representative Torkelson to warn us about it. I hope we'll talk more about both of these reasons for mistrust in the course of this hour.
Thank you. I'd like to remind people that you can call in with a question at 507-276-2099, email lwvnewulm@lwvmn.org. We will now begin with the two questions drafted by the League of Women Voters New Ulm, which were provided to the candidates last week. Tom Custer, would you please answer question number 1? What personal ground rules or processes would you employ to ensure you serve with civility as a legislator? If you want me to repeat that question, I can do that.
I have it here. Would the audience like that?
Pardon me?
Would the audience like it repeated?
I think they're okay with it.
They're okay. There's a great need for civility, not only in the legislature, but across the country everywhere. My personal guarantee of civility lies in the legislative style I propose to adopt, one of solving problems together. My role will be an advocate for you, the people in my district. Advocacy involves, first of all, listening to you, learning from you how your government can partner with you to make your life better. That means analyzing the problems you face, coming up together with solutions, and then taking those solutions to St. Paul, where on your behalf I'll make the case for them, join or build coalitions of support, and get things passed. Building coalitions of support depends on earning the trust of other legislators. I know that without civility, this process would fail. So my entire legislative strategy ensures that I would serve with civility. But civility doesn't mean that we don't ask tough questions. For instance, sometime during this evening, I'd like to hear whether Representative Torkelson supports his party leader's plan for sending the U.S. Army into millions of homes across the country and tearing out the working, tax-paying parents and holding them in concentration camps, probably for years, prior to deporting them. That's what he said he would do. Does our representative support that?
Thank you, Tom. Paul Torkelson, what personal ground rules or processes would you employ to ensure you serve with civility as a legislator?
Well, thank you for the question. First off, I wrote down the golden rule. Treat others as you expect to be treated. I think that is always an important rule for all of us in our public and private lives. Second, you only have one chance to make a good first impression. If you come out of the box as a firebrand, people are not going to be willing to listen to you or tell you what you really need to hear. Controversy, and there's plenty of controversy in the legislature, don't get me wrong. There's lots of things to disagree about, but the disagreements should be about the issues, not about the people. I've tried hard in my 16 years not to make enemies on either side of the aisle, but to treat people with respect. Not that we agree on everything. For instance, Frank Hornstein, who's now retired as a Democrat, he and I traded positions in the Transportation Committee as I was chair, then he was chair, and I was lead, and he was lead. And we disagreed on a lot of things as far as transportation policy, but we got along famously, and that can happen. There are times when dishonesty and a lack of integrity must be called out. There have been situations where other members of the legislature have they've done things that they should be ashamed of, frankly. And I don't think we should be, as other legislators, afraid to call them out when they do. I think that's important. And honestly, there are times when anger is an option. And I would point to the end of session this year when the Democrats came up with a 1,400-page bill that no one had read thoroughly, and forced it through and didn't even use the proper parliamentary procedure to do it. They just went to a vote without even calling the question, and there was a lot of yelling and screaming on the House floor that night, and it was for good reason, because they were breaking the rules.
Thank you. Paul, you're first to answer the second question. During the 2025 legislative session, legislators will generate the budget for the next biennium. What are your top priorities for funding and why?
Well, first, it would be to fulfill promises that were made in the last cycle. The governor and others promised that there would be rebates for everyone because we had this huge surplus. Those rebates, there were small rebates for a targeted few, not rebates for everyone. They also promised that there would be a complete lack of tax on Social Security, that they would eliminate the tax on Social Security benefits, as many other states across this country have done. They eliminated the tax on Social Security for a select few, not for everyone. Next, I would be interested in reining in the excessive growth of state government. State government grew by 40% in one biennium. The budget has exploded, and the size of government has increased dramatically. Thousands of new government employees, new government agencies created, and at the time when we have excessive fraud. I'm sure you've all heard of the Feeding Our Future fraud. Well, there are many other situations where money has been misspent. No one within state government has been called to task, and it's a real problem. We've seen a few people are appearing before court, but nothing has happened within the state agencies. I would eliminate costly mandates. I would help out our emergency services people. We have a real crisis in greater Minnesota with emergency services. I would help out our nursing homes that are also in crisis. And finally, I would make sure that we pass a bonding bill that was promised this last session and didn't pass at the end of session. It failed in the Senate at the last minute, and even that was not a very good bonding bill. We need to invest in our infrastructure. It's aging. Our small towns have aging water and wastewater systems that need to be replaced, and they need help. And we also have issues with transportation, roads and bridges that are starting to fall apart that we need to replace. It takes state help to do that, and so we need to prioritize fixing our infrastructure.
Thank you. Tom Custer, during the 2025 legislative session, legislators will generate the budget for the next biennium. What are your top priorities for funding and why?
Oddly, the answer to that will depend on the outcome of the presidential election. If Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are elected, my budget priorities would be to build on the recent achievements of the DFL-led legislature. After a lot of consulting in Brown and Redwood counties with farm and community leaders who know best what they need, I think my focus will end up being on making living more affordable for families, economic development, that means attention to daycare, housing, job training, and broadband, and on the farm, continuing to work with farmers on financial challenges, management of risk from weather and disease, and long-term profitability. If, however, the Republican wins the White House, we shift into damage control. We'll need to bail out our farmers from the devastating effects of the new brainless tariffs that have been promised and Project 2025 barreling down the street at us. We'll have to make up for a gutted farm bill, the loss of foreign markets, the loss of federal environmental and climate support, the loss of crop insurance protections, the loss of the Weather Service, for goodness sakes, and much more. That would need to be a very different budget. And that leads me to a question again. Does our representative agree that agriculture risk coverage and price loss coverage should be repealed and support for crop insurance should be cut as called for in Project 2025?
Thank you. Tom Custer, you will start with the next question. And this sort of ties in with some things you were saying. Do you anticipate any of the ideas of Project 2025 will influence your work in the legislature?
Would you repeat that again, please?
Sure. Do you anticipate any of the ideas of a Project 2025 will influence your work in the state legislature?
I think I just stated that it would make a great deal of difference. What I called damage control mode, the state would have to go into that. Now, some people say, you hear some people say, and the presidential candidate has said, it has nothing to do with Project 2025, don't look at the man behind the curtain. But when people say that, and I don't mean this personally against anyone, but when people say Project 2025 can be ignored, I put that in the category of either he's stupid or he thinks we are. Of course, President Trump, if he becomes president, will follow Project 2025. He initiated it. His people have written it. They'll fill his cabinet if he's elected, and it does just what he's always wanted to do, primarily making him the most powerful person in the country. So that, and the Supreme Court, has said he can break any law as president and still be immune from that. And so he'll be able to run the country like a New York crime boss, as he's always wanted to do. That's what will happen with Project 2025. And I'd like to hear somebody try to argue with me that it won't happen. I haven't heard any reason, any good reason, why it wouldn't.
Paul Torkelson, do you anticipate any of the ideas of Project 2025 will influence your work in the legislature?
No, I don't. I don't see where it would have any influence. It has not been a topic of discussion among my colleagues or among my caucus. I've never read Project 2025. It's not an official document of the Republican Party. It's certainly not an official document of the Trump campaign. And this is, Tom's a good guy, but he's trying to focus this discussion on what's happening at the national level. I'm not running for a national office. I'm running to represent District 15B. And the issues here in 15B are important to me and important to the citizens of the district. Tom talked about crop insurance. I use crop insurance, and it's an important tool. In fact, this year especially, it's going to be an important tool for farmers because we have a less than ideal crop, and I expect there will be a significant number of crop insurance claims. The Farm Bill, as I understand it, that's been proposed, hasn't passed yet, I wish it would, includes continuing crop insurance. That's coming out of the Republican House. So I don't see that crop insurance is threatened. I don't see that many of the things that are mentioned in Project 2025, although I don't even know what most of them are likely to become law. Even if the president should be Donald Trump, and even if he endorses some of those proposals, they still have to pass the legislature in Washington, D.C., and the odds of that happening are really slim. It's hard to pass laws in this country, especially those that are most controversial. So I just don't see that as a hot topic for my work in the Minnesota House of Representatives. It's not the sort of thing that really has occupied any of my time as I put together my agenda for this campaign or for the next biennium, and I look forward to doing the real work for the real people here in Minnesota.
Paul Torkelson, the next question. Affordable housing is a huge issue in the rural southern Minnesota area. How do you propose to address this problem?
Well, that's a toughie. Frankly, I just was listening to a radio piece on the way over about how affordable housing is a problem all across the country. And the speaker really talked about how it started a long time ago. You may remember back in, I believe it was the 1980s, when we had a housing crisis. I remember visiting my in-laws up in near the Twin Cities, near Forest Lake, and I picked up the Forest Lake paper, and it was filled with hundreds of foreclosures that put a serious dent in house building and started this shortage. Then you add in a number of other issues. We have, which I think this is a double-sided thing. We encourage older folks to stay in their homes. That's great. When I get old, I want to stay in my home too. But it means that they're not moving out of their homes and opening up those homes for the next generation. And it also means that many of our housing units that are capable of housing a whole family are housing one person. It's their privilege, it's their house. I don't hold it against them, but there is an impact on the society in general of all those housing units being occupied by only one person. Then you throw in building cost inflation, which was out of sight. We did an addition on our home on the lake, and the cost of materials was amazing. And that means it's harder and harder for builders to build the houses that are affordable for our moderate income folks. So they instead are building these big mansions, really, because that's where they can make money. So there may be a role for government to play where we can make the red tape less significant for some of these smaller houses and get that housing market working again. The secret is building houses that people can afford.
Tom Custer, affordable housing is a huge issue in the rural southern Minnesota area. How do you prepare to propose to address this problem?
Thank you. May I first suggest, Paul, you really needed to read, especially the agriculture section in Project 2025. I've read it a couple of times. In healthcare, there's a legal, it's something called a legal duty to warn. Duty to warn. In counseling in a healthcare situation, it's confidential, of course, but if the counselor hears something from the counselee that threatens somebody else, they have a legal duty to warn that person that harm is coming. And I'm talking about that semi coming down the street, and I think a political leader has a duty to warn. Now, about the housing, it's really important. Housing is one of the 4 key problems to be solved in rural economic development, along with daycare and broadband and job training. Housing is one of those 4. And the real problem with housing is a financial one. The system is broken. Developers can't finance a housing project since the cost to build a house is going to be more than what the house is worth when it's built. You move into the house, you're below water already. The house of building rental units is more than can be realized by renting those units. That's the system all around the state. Cities can incentivize housing projects. The state needs to help out as well with the financing problems that lie below the housing crisis.
Thank you. Tom Custer, in your opinion, what is the number 1 piece of legislation that is a must, that must be passed in Minnesota?
I don't plan to go to St. Paul with a quiver full of proposals, of positions, of number 1 pieces of legislation. I plan to go to St. Paul with a quiver full of solutions. And I'm going to try to find what solutions to bring by talking to the people in the district. I have some ideas, I mentioned them in my opening, as to what those are going to involve. But the things that I'm going to learn that are most on the minds of the people of the district, that they see as the problems, that the challenges that stand in their way for living a better life, for increasing the economic vitality of their towns, for achieving long-term financial stability on their farms. Those are the things that I'm going to try to work on the most. I'm not certainly going to be the only one doing that. I think people like Paul who are there will be doing those same things because there's a great deal of overlap. I'm not sure there's a lot of difference between Democrats and Republicans when it comes to what's best to do for rural Minnesota. We need housing, we need broadband, we need daycare, we need job training, and those would probably be the areas where I would work the hardest.
Paul Torkelson, in your opinion, what is the number one piece of legislation that must be passed in Minnesota?
Well, thank you. As you stated earlier, one of our jobs this first year of the biennium is to pass a balanced budget. But that balanced budget, of course, includes many bills. The key, though, to getting a balanced budget passed is the tax bill. I believe we need to pass a tax bill. I believe that the spending that was initiated in this last biennium by the Democrats is going to force us toward a deficit. In fact, there is a deficit predicted. Handling that deficit is going to be challenging. I was in the legislature when we had a $6 billion deficit, and we were searching under all the couch cushions to find enough money to keep the required programs operating. The Supreme Court in Minnesota made a decision a couple years ago that there are no longer any essential services. So if we have a government shutdown, everything that is funded by the state will shut down immediately. There'll be no funding of things that are deemed to be very important. So getting this balanced budget across the board is important. Getting a tax bill passed is important. That tax bill needs to include some relief. We are faced, you talk about this truck coming down the highway, we're going to be faced with a high cost of living here in Minnesota, including higher gas taxes, higher tab fees, higher income taxes, are all headed our way. That's the truck that I'm concerned about, not some truck that says 2025 on the side and is somebody's dream out in wherever they dreamt it up.
Thank you. Paul Torkelson, some people, when they retire, move out of Minnesota to a state with lower taxes. What can be done to keep these people from moving away?
Well, this is a real problem. There was just an article in the Star Tribune this week by Andy Brem, who described very nicely exactly what's going on. We already know there's a Minnesota club in Florida. There's probably one in Texas, too, of people from Minnesota that have left Minnesota and taken their tax identity with them and are living in Florida where there are no state income taxes. We also know there's lots of folks moving over to South Dakota. There's a net loss of wealth, of taxable wealth leaving this state. Now you might say, oh, it's a Sun Belt thing. It's people moving south because the weather in Minnesota is so horrible. Well, if that's the case, why isn't the same thing happening in Wisconsin and South Dakota? People aren't leaving those states in the same kind of numbers they're leaving Minnesota, and it's wealthy people. And as those wealthy people leave, where do we get the tax revenue to support all these programs that were passed recently by the Democrats? Everybody's taxes are going to have to go up to fund those programs. They also put automatic inflation in place in the state budget. So the cost of things within the state government is going to go up automatically. It's going to be on autopilot. You're going to see things get more expensive, and the legislature is going to have a much more difficult time keeping these state departments honest because they're going to get inflation built in. This is going to lead to some serious economic problems. And as the cost of living in Minnesota goes up via higher taxes, we're going to see even more people with wealth say, why should I stay here in Minnesota when I can go to another state, not pay any state income tax on my income or on my Social Security benefits?
Tom Custer, some people, when they retire, move out of the Minnesota to a state with lower taxes. What can be done to keep these people from moving away?
Let's not paint a real dire picture. People move in all kinds of directions to and fro states for all kinds of reasons. If some people are leaving for the Sun Belt or for better weather or because they want to be near relatives, taxes might be a factor, it might not be a factor. When people leave Minnesota for whatever reason, they're leaving Minnesota. Minnesota is a great place to live. It's a great place to retire. We plan to do that here. In fact, we have done that here. It's a great place to be. People come to Minnesota because of the quality of life here. Businesses move to Minnesota because of its reputation for a business-friendly state. So let's not paint a dire picture that the state is draining population because of taxes. There may be some people who take that into account, but there are people moving all over in all kinds of directions, and I think Minnesota is doing just fine.
Okay, thank you. Tom Custer. Local cable access channels are funded by fees collected from cable subscribers. With the number of cable subscribers declining, do you support tax reform to provide a new revenue stream to fund cable access television?
See, that's one of those questions about a specific topic that I haven't studied yet. But again, it's going to illustrate my legislative style. If you were to call me in my St. Paul office and ask that question, first thing I would do is start asking you more questions. There seems to be some kind of a problem behind that claim. Support some position or something like that. As I said, I'm not going there with positions. That's what causes gridlock. Everybody goes to St. Paul with positions and then they fight. I want to go with solutions. And so I'm going to talk to the person who asked that question and find out in great detail what's the problem that lies behind that proposed policy. And then I'm going to talk to the people who may be on another side of that policy and learn all I can. And then together, I hope we can sit down and work out a proper solution. That's what I would take to St. Paul. Build or create or locate a coalition to support that solution and get something done to solve that problem.
Paul Torkelson. Local cable access channels are funded by fees collected from cable subscribers. With the number of cable subscribers declining, do you support tax reform to provide a new revenue stream to fund cable access television?
Well, thank you. Cable access television is not something I'm super familiar with because I don't have it in Hanska. But I think it's a good service, and I think it's a valuable way of creating communication links within a community like New Ulm. And if it's important to the citizens, a way will be figured out how to fund it. Now, what's happened, what's really happening is people are cutting the cable, right? Because there are so many other ways to access entertainment these days. It's amazing. I got a smart TV, and it's quite a bit smarter than I am, but it can access stuff that I don't even, stuff from my childhood and stuff from very modern things. So where does local cable access fit in this new entertainment, media, news universe? It's hard to know. So I would suggest if the citizens of New Ulm and other communities that have cable really want that local channel to be available, that they think about how they can find some local sources of funding to fund that, because cable fees are going away, at least a number of them, and you're going to see a continued decline in revenue from that resource. If it's a valuable service, people will find ways to fund it. You go to your city council and say, hey, folks, we like our local cable access. Let's make sure it keeps on going. But the cable companies are probably not the best people to depend on right now.
Thank you. Paul Torkelson. Climate change is impacting agriculture and agricultural practices. How can the legislators collaborate with farmers to adapt to this challenging landscape?
Well, climate change is an extremely challenging issue, and how much can we in Minnesota do to have a real impact? It's hard to say. Dramatic legislation passed that says that we're going to have green energy here renewable energy here in Minnesota by 2040. And then I just read an article yesterday that Xcel has put in an application to build a brand new gas-fired electric plant. I don't think they're planning on shutting that down in 2040. The truth is, to have solid, dependable power that's there 24 hours a day, we need resources of power that work when the sun's not shining and the wind's not blowing. That means nuclear, that means gas. We apparently are moving away from coal, but there is research going on that where we could sequester the carbon that is generated by coal plants. I think we keep all of our options on the table. I really do. Climate change, I don't argue with climate change. I don't know that it's happening. I do know that it's happening, but I don't know that we, as with the legislation we pass in Minnesota, are going to have a dramatic impact on that climate change. We produce, I think, less than 0.5% of the carbon that's produced in the world through energy production. So even if we eliminated all of it, how much impact is that going to have? How much will it really help the environment? I think one thing that we all should think about is energy conservation. It's something that used to be very popular when I was a kid back in the 70s. I think that's something we should be thinking about today, is how we can just use less energy and be more efficient about the way we live.
Thank you. Tom Custer. Climate change is impacting agriculture and agricultural practices. How can the legislature collaborate with farmers to adapt to this changing landscape?
We have two counties, Redwood and Brown, and a sliver of blue earth full of experts on climate change. Those are the farmers, the people who are out there working on the soil and dealing with the challenges that come with climate change, the different diseases that are spreading, the weather patterns that are challenging, and they know what they're doing to deal with those challenges. We need to, if I'm in the legislature, we need to listen to them and do some more of the things that we're already doing, that the legislature is already doing, to encourage those efforts. They're experimenting, they're trying things out. The universities and the extension people are also helping out with this. You know, they're gathering seeds, recognizing that forest patterns are changing in the state of Minnesota because of climate change. So they're collecting seeds to preserve and extend the right kind of forest. There's all kinds of good things going on with dealing with climate change. Tell you what won't deal with climate change. Beep, beep. That truck is barreling down at us. Here are some of the things Project 2025 does to agriculture dealing with climate change. It eliminates the Conservation Reserve Program. It prevents the NRCS from helping farmers with erosion and wetland protection. It eliminates climate-smart farming and sustainable agriculture practices. It ends the inclusion of equity and climate change in the USDA's mission statement. It eliminates the National Weather Service. They don't want to talk about climate. They're crossing the word climate out of everything that happens in Washington if they get into office. Paul, you really need to read Project 2025.
Thank you. Tom Custer. How would you describe the challenges which result from Minnesota's aging population, and what policies and legislation would you support to address these challenges?
My answer will be self-serving. Paul says the smart TV gets programs from his childhood. In my childhood, we didn't even have TV. I remember the first TV coming into our house. But we need elder care policy. I remember congratulating Paul a year ago or so when we met out on the street someplace near a parade for the Republican effort to get extra money into elder care and to nursing homes. That's much needed need more of that. Another thing that's part of economic development in rural Minnesota is worker training. And along with training for the industries that might move into this area that need specific skills for specific jobs, the state can help with that kind of training. Part of the training is for daycare people. We need more of those, along with more daycare facilities. The state has to get involved with daycare for kids because it's an important part of economic development in outstate Minnesota. But the same thing can be said for elder care. We don't need closed facilities for taking care of seniors. We want them nearby. We want them in our communities. We want us older people to be taken care of near our families. And so training for workers, many of them immigrants who work in that industry, all of those things can be encouraged by the state for taking care of the aging community, which is growing. It's growing.
Thank you, Tom. Paul Torkelson, how would you describe the challenges which result from Minnesota's aging population, and what policies and legislation would you support to address these challenges?
Well, first, thank Tom for his kind words of our work on funding nursing homes. In the 2023 session, we and Republicans in the House, coupled with Republicans in the Minnesota Senate, fought tooth and nail and got some funding for nursing homes at the very end of that budget session. It wasn't enough, and it was one-time funding. We've seen nearly 30 nursing homes close across the state of Minnesota in the last, I don't remember exactly the time frame, but in the last few years. These nursing homes in small towns are often the largest employer in a small town, and it's a community center. And when they close and our elderly folks that need nursing home care have to drive hours to find care, they're driving away from their community. They're driving away from their family. That's just not healthy. I remember when my mother and my in-laws were in the nursing home in St. James, and we'd go to visit them, and we weren't just visiting them. We were visiting the retired teacher that was there, or the retired neighbor that was there, or our church members that were there. If you go out of town, you may be the only person from that community in that nursing home. It's a shame. We had good things going, I think, in nursing home care, but the environment has changed. It's gotten very expensive. The care is expensive. They're running out of employees. They can't find enough employees. We've created a situation where the nursing homes, when I was, going back to my childhood again, Tom, but when I was a kid and my grandma was in the nursing home, it was more like assisted livings are today. There was a mix of patients there, both really ill and pretty healthy. Now nursing homes are occupied generally by people that need a lot of care, and that care is expensive. And we need to take a look at this and see what we can do to do a better job of keeping our nursing homes functioning.
Thank you. Well, it's that time of the evening where we are going to be doing our closing statements. And Tom Custer, you're first with your closing statement.
Thank you, League. Wonderful public service. Given the demographics of our district, I suspect most of you watching this have voted for Republicans for a long time. I've been around a long time. I was 5 years old when Dwight Eisenhower, later a Republican president, led the greatest generation to defeat the Nazis. Now that party's head seeks support from the Nazis, and he says they're very fine people. I remember when the Republican President Reagan said, "Tear down this wall," and oversaw the collapse of the Soviet Union. Now that party wants to help Putin rebuild that empire by giving him Ukraine and maybe Poland and who knows what else. I remember when Republican congressmen, when their President Nixon broke the law, went and told him to resign or be impeached. Now their party rallies around their leader no matter how many crimes he's committed and been convicted of. Republicans used to favor limited government. They supported NATO, condemned dictators, welcomed immigrants and refugees, favored free trade, promoted democracy, valued character in their leaders, and revered the Constitution. All that is gone. That Republican Party no longer exists. MAGA stole its name. You owe no loyalty to the MAGA R on the ballot. As someone in the growing group of Republicans for Harris has said, voting Democrat this time does not make you a Democrat. It makes you a patriot, doing your part to reclaim the Republican Party by removing the stain at its top.
Thank you. Paul Torkelson, your closing remark.
Well, thank you, Kathleen, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for hosting this forum tonight, as they have done for many cycles over the years, and I've been privileged to participate. And I would like to thank my opponent for an informative discussion. I also want to speak my heartfelt appreciation for the opportunity to represent this district in St. Paul. One-party control of Minnesota government allowed for the passage of an extremely liberal agenda that I believe is irresponsible and unaffordable. During my time in Minnesota House, I've worked hard to rein in wasteful spending within state government, allow you to keep more of what you earn, preserve your liberties, protect your Second Amendment freedoms, and fight for the rights of the most vulnerable. I want to unite, not to divide, and I passionately believe that Minnesota can and will be up to the task of dealing with the challenges before us. I'm here tonight asking for your vote. Thanks again, and I'm going to jump off my script for a second. One of the things I've been pushing hard all over the state as I've been traveling around is getting out and voting. There are new tools available. Absentee voting is easier than it's ever been. Early voting is going to happen. We should, all of us, make sure that we cast our ballots in this next election. Voting is an honor and a privilege and a right, and we should all of us who can legally vote should do that. At the same time, we need to make sure our system is intact, and we've had some incidences recently that call some of that into question. Hopefully we can get those cleared up and people will forget about their suspicions and go out and vote. Thanks again for listening, and don't forget to vote on November 5th.
Let's thank the candidates for their participation tonight. The League of Women Voters wishes to thank everyone who helped with this educational event, including our candidates, League of Women Voters volunteers, NewCat, KNUJ, and the Journal. This forum was designed to educate you for your vote in the general election. Remember, the general election takes place on November 5th, 2024, and as Paul talked about, all the other options that you have for voting these days. For complete information on elections, voting, including registration, go to vote411.org. That's vote411.org. Please remember to vote. It matters. Thank you and good night.